Hello and welcome to Managers, How to Structure Your One-on-Ones Leveraging Microsoft Teams. My name is Nathan Austin. I'll be presenting today, and Stephanie will be producing this session. Basically means she's working behind the scenes to make sure that questions get answered and that answering things offline as well as interjecting them throughout the session or at the end. So thank you for joining us today. We will take 30 minutes on this how-to session, really helping supervisors and team leads to structure their meetings, their one-on-one meetings with their team. So there is a Q&A panel on the side. So by all means, as we go through this, please go ahead and interject your questions or ask your questions along the side. And we will do our best to, we will stick around afterwards and answer them at the end. We're going to be very prescriptive in the first 30 minutes, but after that, we're going to stick around and answer everybody's question if you have time to stick around. All right, moving on. So first and foremost, this is a how-to session. One of the challenges of Office 365 is that there's lots of different ways to do things. In the Q&A, I will most likely bring up some additional methods or options or complexity that could be presented, but for the sake of this session, we're working to keep it as simple as possible and as straightforward as possible to get you and your direct reports comfortable with leveraging Office 365 and Teams for one-on-ones. All right, so with that said, we're going to go through some of the common one-on-one meeting objectives. Now, I understand that there's different types of departments and teams and individuals and frequencies in which one-on-ones are being held. So I'm not going to get into all of that, but that's a kind of an operational and business management decision. However, we are going to just talk about what are the common objectives that are oftentimes faced or to cover in a one-on-one. Then we're actually going to build out the structure. Just like every one of our sessions, we've been building out the structure in Teams and Office 365 and showing you how to do that to help address some of those common problems that are solved. And then at the end, we'll hit some Q&A as well as some recommended action items relative to one-on-ones and this structure. Okay, real quick, again, just a little bit about MyTech. Basically, what we want to make sure we communicate with everyone that we're not a training company. We do this to really help as part of our mission to grow, help, and make a difference in our community. So we want anyone, whether you're a client or not, to be able to use this technology better. So we work with small, medium businesses in the communities in which we operate, and we have a proven IT strategy that we know can realize and deliver results, proven results. Basically, we know that there are a lot of problems that we as organizations and businesses face, and we're just hoping that we can take one of those problems away, the IT challenges that you may face, and help you get more return on investment. We coach our team to make IT easy for you, which doesn't always make IT easier for us, but that's the point. We need to make IT easy for you. And the combination of all that, we know our clients can achieve 4 times more value and productivity from their IT investment. So enough about MyTech. We'd love to help in any way we can, so please reach out afterwards. But otherwise, let's move on to the core content today. All right, so first and foremost, let's go through an overview of common one-on-one meeting objectives. This is based on management philosophy. There's a lot of management books out there. One of the things that if you haven't heard of this, it's one thing that I've really enjoyed and has helped me as I was growing and trying to improve my leadership as a manager, is a podcast or an app that you can download to your phone called Manager Tools. It's literally just Manager Tools, and there's free one-on-one podcasts that kind of teach and coach you on how to lead good one-on-ones. There's plenty of other content there as well, but that's something that, especially if you're trying to find ways in which to help hone and improve your management skills, either yours or people on your team, this is a free resource that's available that any one of your managers can listen to. So that's one of the ones that I would recommend, because we're going to follow some of the common objectives that are covered in those podcasts, as well as just through other management and leadership books that are out there. So those common objectives. First and foremost, setting up video audio collaboration is not necessarily a common problem when we're meeting face to face. However, because we all find ourselves working remotely and virtually, that's an important thing to make sure that we cover as far as starting your one-on-one meeting. The other tip that I always like to mention around this is I've evolved, again, from personal experience, not that I'm by any means the best manager out there, or that I've got the something that's applicable to the way you interact with your team. But one of the challenges that I used to have is I used to have people, my direct reports, come to my office for our one-on-one time. But then I realized that it's really more important that I go to either their office, or I've now actually been scheduling them sometimes in small conference rooms when we're physically in the same location. One of the things that I found is that having the person who reports to me on my team navigate the session, they should really be driving. They should really be working through these tools. It gives me, as a manager, as their supervisor, an opportunity to understand how they are adapting and adopting the technology, how well they're understanding it, and it gives me opportunities to improve the way they're navigating through these things, through these tools, above and beyond just do they know how to interact with teams or some of the other coaching and mentoring that I might do for them through the one-on-one session. So anyway, the reason why I hit that on the setting up the video audio collaboration segment is that I would encourage you virtually to have your team member initiate the call. I would recommend that they are the ones that are sharing their screen and navigating through these tools, because if they don't know how to navigate through it, then they're not going to leverage it to its full capacity, and you're not going to realize the full benefit on your team. So a subtle little tip, but that's something that I would strongly recommend, especially after you train and coach and get your team comfortable. So anyway, starting with setting up the audio collaboration, having a standing agenda and making sure that you as a manager and a supervisor walk through that and you go through the same agenda every week. Capturing meeting minutes and notes. What are your meeting metrics? Nearly every role has some sort of metrics or objectives that they're trying to accomplish. I've provided some sample information in the session today, but really making sure that you're clear on that. I know while this isn't a management coaching session, one of the things that I found is that the more, if I was vague on what weekly and monthly expectations and metrics are, it was more difficult for me to manage and more difficult for my team to understand what I expected of them. So having that defined, that's unfortunately, that's a challenge that does lie on the manager or the supervisor. So having those clear will help you through this process. Then hitting on one-on-one shared topics to discuss. One of the areas that I find has really helped me as a manager operate during the week more freely, as well as my direct report member of my team, is that they have a place to capture something that they want to discuss with me in our one-on-one. Now, if there's something urgent, they can obviously come to me, Teams me, call me, etc. But if it's something that isn't urgent, that that can wait till our one-on-one, we're going to provide them a place to be able to do that through this session. That way, it prevents you from in the middle of your one-on-one saying, "Hey, are there any obstacles that you're facing, or anything I can help you with?" And they have, "Oh gosh, there was that one thing that I remembered. It was last week. Gosh, I forgot. Maybe it'll come to me." I want to avoid that, because those are usually important things that they're not urgent, but they are important for you to deal with and help your team member with. So we're going to provide a shared place for that, as well as tracking action items and to-dos. We're going to show you a couple different ways to do that. Again, it's personal preference, but we're going to show you a couple different ways to do that, as well as in having a place to share confidential documents. That's one of the challenges sometimes that the file structure doesn't always allow very easily, is permissioning so that only you and your direct report have access to that document versus other people on the team. So putting it in a place where you might share, if it's commission reports or action plans or performance improvement plans, those are some places where you might be able to collaborate with an individual confidentially. So we'll show you that as well. Okay, so those are the common objectives. I'm sure that there are others that are out there that, with all of you listening in, that you might have some other things that you're trying to accomplish. Please put those in the Q&A panel or follow up with us afterwards. We'd love to hear those and possibly work those with you today. So without further ado, we are going to go into building out the virtual team structure. I'm going to pull up my notes here because I put them on my laptop. All right, sorry about that. So we're going to build out the virtual structure here. Okay, so I'm going to go into the browser. Now, what I would recommend as we go through just starting the one-on-one, so I've got I'm going to use Stephanie as an example. So Stephanie is on my team and she reports to me. I use the chat that I have individually with team members to organize, not unlike I did when you're structuring a department meeting. I use Teams. So I'm going to switch over to that, for example. Notice how if I'm a member, if I'm leading the operations team, I built out specific tabs at the top based on the things that my team goes through from a meeting agenda perspective. Well, in a chat, we're going to use a similar philosophy, except it's just going to be me and the direct report as opposed to me and the team. All right, so first and foremost, one of the things that I like is just a little tip, is if you select, notice how when you hover over a chat, you've got the breadcrumbs or the ellipses that pop up there. And if you notice that Stephanie and Gerald are pinned here at the top. So one of the ways you do that, it's really quick and simple, and I'd recommend doing this for anyone that's on your team or anyone with whom you regularly interact with the chat, is you click on the ellipse, and you can either pin or unpin. So I'm going to unpin Stephanie to illustrate the point. I unpin Stephanie, and then what happens if they're unpinned, it'll just be a rolling stream of whoever pinged you or chatted with you last will roll to the top. But if you pin them, then they will always exist at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and pin Stephanie to the top again. So now Gerald and Stephanie are always at the top of my chat list. That helps me navigate very quickly as a manager, whether I'm chatting with them during the day or whether or not I'm just getting together for their one-on-one. Now, as I mentioned, we need to start with some of the basics as far as creating the meeting. So what I would do is ask Stephanie. So Stephanie responded. I said, hey, are you ready for our one-on-one? She said, yes. So what I would ask Stephanie to do, I'm not going to, is that she actually go through, I'm not going to ask her to do it right now because we're in the session, but I would ask her to start a video call. When she starts a video call, she'll be able to, in fact, I'll be able to answer it, and I'll ask her to share her screen. So that's how to start the meeting. Again, I'll quickly illustrate the difference if you're doing that in a Teams channel. In a Teams channel, notice those icons don't exist up here like they do in a chat. It's actually down here. You have to click on the Meet Now icon down here, and that's actually how you start a meeting if you're, say, running a department meeting. However, in a chat, it's just listed in the upper side. You can just do a quick audio call or you could do a quick video call. Either way works. And some people ask, why would you do audio versus video or both? Is that the video, if you're struggling with bandwidth, sometimes just doing an audio call might be easier. Or if you're driving, for example, and you have it connects to your Bluetooth, you can do that as well versus a video call. So anyway, either of those options are here at the top. The other thing that I would suggest as you start, as you execute the meeting is pull up multiple tabs. I'll show you that in a moment, but one of the things you can do if you're doing a video call is if you're sharing your screen, in fact, a question that came up a couple weeks ago was, if I'm sharing my screen and covering Teams, I can't see the video at the same time. Well, if you have multiple monitors, and if you could pop out the video into one monitor, and you could share the screen of one of the other screens, and you could have tabs open, for instance, to be able to show that. So I'll illustrate that, but that's where you could have, if you have multiple monitors at home, which I would highly recommend, or at the office, you could pop out the audio or the video onto one side so you can still see the people with whom you're interacting from the shared screen, which then might be sharing a different tab or a different application. So that's a little tip that I always like to cover. We talked about pinning. Okay, so now we talked about common objectives relative to creating a shared agenda and a place for notes. So in the chat, notice there are tabs here at the top. Now these are the default tabs that exist in a chat: is files, organization, and activity. Files is the place where you can share confidential documents. By the nature of these files, you're effectively only sharing those files with this person, or they are only sharing those files with you. So this is that place where you can confidentially share files. I haven't uploaded anything into here, but I'll illustrate that later. Organization, there's not going to be a lot of information here. We haven't set this up. And activity, it just shows recent activity of this person. So those are the tabs. You can ignore these for the sake of this conversation. What I would like to bring to attention is hit Add Tab. So I'm going to click Add Tab, And one of the options, you have a bunch of options here. You can make it a Word document, plenty of other items, but one of the things that I recommend for one-on-ones is just having a OneNote notebook. So I'm going to click OneNote. Now at this point, it gives you the option of either creating a new notebook or adding an existing one. For the sake of this illustration, I already created the one-on-one notebook for Stephanie. I actually created it through this method because when I do that, it's also automatically permissioning her to have access to this information. So again, I'll go back really quick. You hit the plus icon, navigate to OneNote. You can select create new notebook, and that'll actually automatically create the notebook for Stephanie and I, and you can choose to name it right there. But I already created one, and I already have some notes in there, so I'm going to use the existing one that I've already created. But I use this exact same method to do that. All right, so that is going there. So I've created this OneNote notebook, and one of the things you'll note is that I haven't always seen this, but for in this demo tenant, it's basically making sure that it's read only by default here. If I want to edit it, I basically need to open it in the browser. So I'm going to actually click, but the nice thing is it gives me one click. I can click either here, I can here to open it in the app, or even this browser, even this icon up here will allow me to open it up in the web browser. So I'm going to click here and open it up in the browser. Notice you see the exact same thing that you saw in the Teams section when you viewed it through Teams. And there's a couple different ways to lead through meeting notes. One, if you're familiar with OneNote, these are the different tabs. And notice in my OneNotes, I actually have these. If I'm the manager, I have my different notebooks. But I created one of the pages is a one-on-one agenda. And I have a standing agenda here at the top. And this is something that if you want to adjust as managers, it's helpful to share this not only with your team, but if there are items for that particular individual that you want to have as a unique standing one-on-one agenda topic, go ahead and add it, right? You can just go in here and say unique item for Stephanie. Right, I can keep that, and that way, every time I do my one-on-one, the way I end up doing that is I basically start notes. I say April 7th one-on-one, and then I copy and paste this information down to this section, and we start the conversation. And actually, this is where I recommend, as I mentioned earlier, having Stephanie share her screen, having Stephanie do these steps, so that I get to see her building this out and walking through it, so that I understand that she knows how to navigate through these different aspects. So this is one way of doing it, where you have the standing agenda at the top and you just continually add new notes. So if the next meeting comes up, for instance, I can go April 14th, not 15th. I can hit that, and then I'll just quickly copy and paste. So now I have the next week's notes ready to go. For instance, and if Stephanie, one of the items that we talked about was, well, what if Stephanie, after our one-on-one's finished for today and she has something she wants to bring up next week? Well, this is where looks like she might be trying to type while I was trying to type, but Stephanie could come in here and we could write that thing I wanted to discuss right in here. Interesting. It's oh, and then Stephanie just added something, event schedule for next week. So notice she added that right as I was typing. I didn't even type that. So she's editing this at the same time. But this is something where your direct report can go during the week whenever it makes sense. Again, these are for non-urgent things, yet they're important. So this gives you a place to have a standing meeting agenda, notes to which you both have access, as well as places for your direct report to be able to put topics that they might want to discuss in the next week or in one of the next one-on-ones. Okay, so the other way to do this, if you happen to, if you like this, is you could create instead you could create an additional page. So you could hit new page, as I did over here, and I created a new page with the one-on-one notes. And then let's say I could do another page. Hey, Stephanie, while you're at it, why don't you go ahead and create a new page with April 14th notes, if you're able to do that while I'm listening. So see, Stephanie added one. She's typing away as we speak. So this is really a matter of personal preference. if you want to have pages along the side to navigate to the different one-on-one notes, you can do that, or you can have just rolling on one page here, and these other pages could be whatever you might want to use them for. So that's really a personal preference around OneNote. So yeah, then the only other item I'd like to mention around this is that if you recall, I'm going to switch back to Teams, and I'm going to switch back to when you're in the a team meeting. I don't use a wiki. This is a wiki. I'll give you an example of what that is. So it looks similar to OneNote from that perspective, but it actually allows you to add sections differently. I really like this for using team meeting notes. However, a wiki is not an available tool in one-on-ones. So that's one of the reasons why I don't use wiki in one-on-ones. But I also like, but wikis also don't integrate with OneNote. So if your direct report uses a OneNote notebook application on their desktop or laptop, this also, from a one-on-one perspective, integrates and can be synced with their local OneNote. So that's something that they don't necessarily have to go into the Teams chat to be able to access it. If they use OneNote for other notes that they might use for client meeting notes or other internal team notes, they can actually use that, and it'll sync here as well. So a couple little tips around using the standing agenda and or using OneNote versus Wiki, as well as using having a rolling meeting notes down here, or you could choose the different pages, as Stephanie added this while I was talking about the other item. Again, it syncs really well. If you're familiar with OneNote, it's a great tool. Okay, so now we've hit on just a place for standing notes, being able to keep track of topics of discussion, as well as a standing agenda. So those are some of the basic common topics. But if we go down the agenda here, what about reviewing weekly objectives? All right, so hitting on weekly objectives. This is also a matter of personal preference. For us, we are very transparent with our team members as far as what their goals are and their attainment of those goals, because they are public knowledge. So we don't keep them private. So one of the things that, so say Stephanie is on the, I've been using the illustration of being on the operations team. So one of the things that I've done with my teams is to say, all right, we're on the operations team. One of the quick ways to navigate to that, if I want to go, I'm going to create a folder structure in SharePoint where weekly metrics are going to be saved. So one of the ways to do that, if you click on your team here, if you're not familiar or you're not used to doing this, click on the file section. And I like to do the quick link here, open in SharePoint. So click on that, it's going to open up in SharePoint. And notice it by default goes to the general folder because Teams is opening up, excuse me, sorry about that. Teams is I'm in the general channel. So when I open up in the browser, it goes to the general folder, but I'm going to navigate back one step to documents. So these are all the just documents and folders that I've created inside of the operations team. Notice there's a folder here called team metrics. So what I want to do is, instead of having to navigate to this every time, I'm actually going to share a link to this folder inside of the team chat with Stephanie. So as I hover over it, notice you have to hover over it and you'll see this little share icon. I'm going to click share. I'm just going to copy the link here. All right, the link's copied. Now I'm going to go into this section and I'm going to add. And I'm just going to go, now it's interesting, in the chat, in the team section allows you to add SharePoint. I'm not adding SharePoint, I'm just going to add a link. So I'm going to click, because it's just a URL. So I'm going to use the website option. And I'm going to call this weekly metrics. And I'm just going to paste that link there. So it's creating a new tab. And so now it's linking to that folder. Notice documents, team metrics, which is the same thing as here. It's documents, team metrics. And I click on that and you see these folders. So I've actually created a spot. And again, it depends on how this could be a dashboard. Sometimes you want people to manually enter this information. Sometimes there might be a report that they get. There's lots of different ways to do this, but if you happen to use an Excel spreadsheet and you're tracking some of these things individually, as a manager, I oftentimes like the individual to understand how those metrics are gathered and know how to track that information, because they really understand and own that information more. If we can build it into a dashboard, I do recommend that, but only after the individual understands where those metrics come from and how they contribute to those metrics resulting where our expectations are. So I'm going to open up Stephanie's weekly metric. So notice it pops open Excel. This is something that I've created as far as if Stephanie was in sales. This could be examples like prospect meetings or networking events, or referrals given, revenue generated. If she was on a service team or was responsible for billable work, like an attorney or accountant, any professional services, there might be some utilization metrics. There might be billable hours, there might be client satisfaction. It could also be manufacturing or producing a certain amount. It could be around service level targets. You get the idea. These metrics need to be based on the role, but possibly building out a way for an individual on the team to be able to update that information. And so my expectation when I work with my team is that if there's something like this, that they have this information updated before they come into the meeting. If they haven't had that updated, then they need to fill this information out in the meeting. So if this, for instance, wasn't an Excel spreadsheet, notice I built out this and I can also, of course, open it in the app if I wanted to. I could click on this and open it up in the browser. But if this wasn't a spreadsheet, this link that we just shared could just as simply be a link to a dashboard. So if you had a URL to a dashboard that might present this information, it could just as easily be a link to that dashboard, and then that website would also show up in here too. All right. So I'm going to move along to the last aspect of weekly of the session, which is really around tracking to-dos and goals. Now, there's a couple different options I want to share here because at an individual level, it's different, and there's a couple different ways to do it. So I'm going to open into the browser here. There's actually to-dos. It's an option. Notice what I did here is in my to-do, I created a Stephanie to-do. I shared it with her. So now I can see it's shared with Stephanie. And then there's also a plan. So I created a plan that is Stephanie a one-on-one plan. So either way works. And there's just a couple different ways to integrate that into Teams if you want to be able to do that. So for instance, you'll notice when I click into Teams, I'll click into the browser version of Teams, into the chat. When I click on, forgive me, I'm going to click on the add the tab here, because that's what I want to do. I want to add the tab for quick and easy access to those tools. So in the tab, notice there's not an option for planner. There's not an option for to do. However, if you noticed, I was just accessing both of those in the web browser. So I'm just going to click on website here, and I'm going to say to do. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to take, these are my to-dos. I'm logged in, and I'm just going to take this part of the URL. Just going to copy the browser URL, and I'm going to paste it right in here. So what that's going to do is on my side, meaning my view as the when I'm logged in, is I will see my to-do, which is based on my login, and I will see my to-do lists. And that's taking a moment, so sorry about that. But when and so I was able to quickly load it, but Stephanie will actually see her lists and her to-dos. So she won't see some of these other like Gerald to-dos, but I shared that with Gerald and Stephanie. So that's one way to do it. I'm gonna reload this tab and see if that does it as I'm waiting. So that's one way to do it. You can actually share to-dos. So if you're having a conversation with Stephanie, again, you could just open it up in the browser like I did. We could have Stephanie's to-do up here, and in our one-on-one, Stephanie agrees next week, update report. So now that's added to Stephanie's to-do. I have visibility to it as her supervisor, and she has visibility to it in her to-do. And by the way, we have a recording of managing your digital to-dos in a virtual world that we did last week, and then we'll get into a little bit more how to-do can be used. We're not going to cover that today in detail. The other way to do it, I'm going to go back to the plan, as that's not still resolving. It doesn't usually do that, but is I'm going to add a plan. So the same thing. We've got the browser up here. I'm actually just going to open this up. So I'm in this Stephanie's one-on-one. I'm going to go into Teams, and I'm going to choose website. Again, the key thing is I'm clicking on the tab. I'm going to choose website, and I'm going to choose planner. I'm going to say SK plan. I always call Stephanie SK for Kingsley, which is her last name. SK plan or actions. And then I'm just going to paste that here. And now it's creating a new tab that's basically the link to Planner. This also works for those of you who might be watching who asked about adding a plan to a private channel, which you can't do technically, but if you use the website feature, you can. So I'm actually going to again open that in the browser. It usually does resolve inside of the Teams window. Maybe I should try this. Go into Stephanie. It might work better in the plan. Here it goes inside of Teams. There you go. You see I'm in Teams, and it opened up the plan. And I could add a task for next week. Another thing to do, right? Assign to Stephanie. So this is something that could work. I'm going to make it for next week. Add the task, or I could click on to-dos, and this should open up her to-do. And again, this is so I see all this, but when Stephanie clicks on that link, it'll actually log her into her to-do, and she'd be able to see that as well. So these are a couple of different ways to be able to track and easily keep track of action items, notes, to-dos. You could use to-do, or you could use Planner. Planner has a little bit more flexibility because you can actually dig into these. You can add attachments to them. You've got different tabs, like you can have quarterly initiatives off to the side. You could get creative and do that inside of to-do, but Planner gives you a little bit more flexibility to be able to do that. And you could also add members to it. So for some reason I wanted to bring in somebody else, I could add somebody else. Like if I wanted to bring in Gerald, I could add Gerald really quick as well. I could do that in to-do as well. It's just a couple different ways to be able to manage to-dos. So I'm going to go back really quick to this section that we covered, talking about the video audio collaboration, how to have a standing agenda, where you can keep track of meeting minutes and notes. Weekly metrics, you could share a folder. That could also be a link to a dashboard where you can have shared topics to discuss, how to capture action items and to-dos, as well as you can share confidential documents. And that is all in the Teams. The confidential documents, again, is here. So I know that was quick. There's a lot of information to cover, but as a summary here, again, if you understand the key objectives you're trying to solve, like building out that agenda, what are the different ways to do it? Write down a few things that you might have taken from this session today, like maybe learning how to use the to-do app, maybe exploring how Planner might work for you. One of the ones that I was suggesting is download the Manager Tools app. It's a free app that you can download on your phone, and there's free podcasts to help you as a manager or your other managers on your team as far as one-on-ones and other management tips and tools. Try and take some action in the next 24 to 48 hours. That can help you at least start driving adoption. And finally, to help drive adoption amongst your team, once you start using this, I encourage you to have your team, teach your team how to use it first and foremost, but I encourage you to have your team lead the sessions. You'll get to see how well they're adopting, and it'll help force them learning how to use these tools, and it'll give you opportunity to coach and mentor them at the same time. So with that said, thank you so much for attending. I definitely want to open it up for a Q&A, but in the meantime, I want you all to stay safe and healthy if you're dropping off right now, and I look forward to seeing you at future sessions that we're running every week for the next several weeks. Thanks a lot and have a great day.